Hey everybody, Todd Albert here from Boca Code, and I am glad you're joining me today for this live session on setting up your Mac for development. Pardon me one second, and there we go. So I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, both Palm Beach Tech. If you're not a member of Palm Beach Tech and you're part of the tech community, I highly recommend getting involved, joining, become a member. Even if you don't become a member, join the Palm Beach Tech Slack channel. Go to palmbeachtech.org/Slack and get involved in a very active community, job postings, helping each other. It's really quite an amazing and unique part of the tech community. And then also Boca Code, for which I am the founder and lead instructor, helping educate and train the future of developers and current developers. So hopefully you're joining us here because you're one of those, a future or a current developer. So let's take a look at how to set up your Mac for such a thing. So here's what we're going to go over today. We're going to be looking at installing Xcode, which is what's used to compile, and some of the tools that come along with it. Even if you have Xcode installed, there's a command line command that you want to run. We're going to look at Brew, some command line tools you want to install, how to configure Git, setting up Visual Studio, and then go through some language specific installs. However, this is going to be kind of quick and dirty, but not making assumptions, of previous knowledge. So first thing you want to do, almost everything that we're going to be doing today is going to be done within terminal. If you don't know how to enter terminal, if you hit Command Space on your keyboard, that opens this Spotlight search. And if you type TER, you'll get the terminal app. You can hit enter to launch that, right? Or you can also launch it by going to your applications, utilities, and there's terminal. Most of us end up keeping this on our dock. For those of us that are developers, we keep terminal on our dock because we use terminal constantly. If you're not comfortable with command line, you'll get comfortable very quickly, and you hopefully within the next few minutes. Some developers choose to use alternatives like iTerm and some of these others. I happen to really like the terminal program that comes with Mac OS. It's very easy to add new tabs. It's very easy to customize. Right off the bat, I think it comes with a light theme, but you can jump in there and change your default theme. Mine, let's jump over to mine. You could see I have well, there's a lot of stuff going on here, but you could see I use a dark theme like this, and let's see, I have some shortcuts set up and so forth. So everything we're going to be doing is going to be right from the terminal here, and although I'm just going to be showing you these commands here. So make sure you're familiar with terminal. I really like it, and I hope you will get used to it as well. So first thing we're going to do is install some tools through Xcode that give us access to compilers and other tools that we need for development. So you're going to run this command xcode-select space -- install, and that will go through and it will install the Xcode tools that you need, whether you have Xcode installed or not. Watch your terminal window, because it may actually ask you for prompts for things. Answer some yes/no questions by hitting Y or N and then hitting enter. So keep an eye on that. That'll get you most everything you need installed to become a developer. We're also going to run Homebrew, and this actually is a single line command. I have it wrapped here to fit. It's a long command, but you can get it if you look. Oh crap! Hold on a second. We can switch my video off, and then you'll see, boom, right here. If you go to brew.sh, that will tell you all about Homebrew, and you can copy this command from there. So brew.sh, that's where you're going to grab this command from. Once you have Homebrew installed, you can make sure it's working properly. This is a new command that I actually wasn't aware of, new to me, sorry. I wasn't aware of this command until just the other day. Brew Doctor, very cool for those of us that are experienced or not. It goes in and shows you who's like how things are set up in Brew and what needs to change, commands, specific commands to fix it. Very cool. So I was very pleased to discover that the other day. And you could always make sure Brew is updated. You could do this from any time at the command line, just with Brew update. And what this does, so Brew helps you install packages and software on your computer, and you can do so. You can do so with usually with a single command, like you're going to see here in a moment. So Brew is extremely useful, but always make sure to keep it updated with this single command, Brew update, and now you make sure you have all the latest, what are called casks or kegs. It's all beer reference. So make sure you get your casks and your kegs are updated by Brew update. So once we have that, the next thing we're going to install is Git. If you're not familiar with Git, you will, as a developer, become very familiar with Git. This helps you do something called version control, which is when you're first starting out as a developer, sometimes version control can be a little confusing, can be a little tricky to learn, but this will become your best friend. And there's two main types of version control. There's SVN and there is Git. And really Git has become the de facto standard in the development world. Some people are still using SVN. It's better for certain things, but Git is by far the most widely used. And there are sites like GitHub that help you manage and your versioning of your software. So what does this do? Git will actually, when you set up Git for a project, it'll actually check line by line, character by character for changes. And so what can happen is you can record those changes, you can see a history of those changes over time. And when you have multiple people working on a project, you can even go back and see who changed what lines of code and when. And it's very easy to roll back. It's very easy to create branches where you can try out a new or develop a new feature and then merge it in later. So extremely useful. So definitely get familiar with Git. Once it's installed, you want to just one time you're going to go through this configuration where you're just going to set up what your name is. So when you have some, when you've committed code to a project, it'll say who committed that code, your email, which helps you log into your Git repositories, like through GitHub. And then this third line here is optional, but it helps like automatically add some color to the otherwise black and white terminal, so you can actually see things highlighted in different color, and it makes it for a prettier, more easy to read messaging and so forth when you do Git. So for example, if I jump out here and I go into our Boca Code repository, cd code maybe, and then cd Boca Code, and I can say something like git status to see, have I changed anything? It says, nah, you're good, nothing new to change. So, but if there was something changed, it would highlight the file name in red for me and tell me if it hasn't been committed yet, and so forth. So really useful, really good, and I recommend the auto color. This also was something embarrassingly new to me, is in your home directory, which there's always this shortcut, this tilde is always the shortcut to your home directory. So your users/Todd or whatever your home directory is, you can shortcut it just with this tilde. So if you add a file called .git ignore into your home directory, which those of you who are familiar with Git, you've used Git ignore, and what that does is it says if you make changes to any of these files, don't version those, don't commit those, don't, just ignore those. and there's some real big advantages to this. So like node modules here, for those of us that are working in JavaScript, this is a way where you can install a bunch of libraries, but you don't have to commit it to your single repository. And anyone can install those libraries when they download your repo. Other things like your thumbnail cache files on your system and other cache files and stuff that are just specific to your system that don't need to be in your repository. We can add these, tell Git, just ignore all of these files. And what I just learned recently was that you can actually add a Git Ignore to your home directory, and then and so you can search and find examples of these standard files. But then with this single command, you can say, hey, globally across all of my Git repositories, exclude all the files that are in my Git Ignore in my home directory here. And now for every new project you start, it will always ignore those files for you. Really, really useful command. Something I wish I had known years ago. All right. There's also another thing that you might want to do when setting up Git, which is actually creating these SSH keys on your computer. These are like, if you think about like a garage door clicker in your car that's specifically coded to your garage door, this is almost like that. So when you're on your home computer or your laptop, your personal computer, and you want to send or get files from GitHub, you don't have to always type in your password. You can actually store a secure key on your computer, go into your GitHub account and connect that key one time. So if you just search GitHub SSH keys in Google, it'll bring you in and show you directions. Or if you're using Bitbucket instead of GitHub, there's ways to do this there. So I'm not going to run through this. It only takes about 1 or 2 minutes to set this up, but you set it up once on your machine, and then you can always access your repositories from that machine without a password, which is very convenient. So moving on, there's a couple of other apps that I really recommend for developers, and you can install these by using Brew, Cask, and then the names of these programs. So one that I really like is Caffeine. Yes, I'm a coffee drinker. I love caffeine. But in this case, caffeine is a way to keep your computer awake when you walk away. So, everybody has this situation where you're in the middle of working on something, you get a phone call, somebody walks over, they start talking to you, or you go to get a cup of coffee, or you go to the bathroom, and you come back and your computer's asleep, or screensaver, and you're, come on, and there's times where you don't want your computer to sleep. You don't want it to go into screensaver. So Caffeine is among a family of programs where you can tell it, hey, keep my computer awake for the next 2 hours or 3 hours or 5 hours or indefinitely. And I really cannot emphasize how much these programs help me on a day-to-day basis. Docker, a lot of development now is using what are called containers, which I'm not going to get into in this talk, but very often you're going to need Docker installed. If you don't know what it is, you don't leave it out, but just know Brew, Cask, Docker, and you can install Docker with one line. If you don't have Chrome installed, most developers really have are fixated on using Chrome. Safari is also really good for development. Both have their pros and cons. Some web developers, insist that they should have every browser available installed on their machine. I tend to switch mostly between Safari and Chrome. This is very opinionated, what web browser one should use. Google Chrome has some excellent development tools, but if you want to look at your device, your website rather, on mobile, something you can do in Safari, plug your iPhone, let's say, into your Mac, and in Safari on your iPhone, you can go into development mode. In Safari on your Mac, you can go into development mode, and you can actually use the inspector. You can actually have the inspector up on your Mac as you're working on the site on your device, which is something you can't do in Chrome that I'm aware of. So really powerful tool in Safari. Safari also uses a lot less memory than Google Chrome, but despite Google Chrome's shortcomings, a lot of us end up coming back to it, especially in the development world. Let's move on. So it used to be that what text editor or IDE you used, which is where you're actually going and writing your code, and sometimes compiling, sometimes debugging, and so forth, your code. It used to be that if you go back 5 years ago and you ask 10 developers, you'd get 10 different answers of what text editor or IDE they're using. Today, that's very rare. Almost every developer now is using VS Code, Visual Studio, or Visual Studio Code. And you can install it right here. Brew, Cask, install Visual Studio Code, and boom, one line, and you've got VS Code installed. And then you're going to want to go into VS Code and make a couple of tweaks. Okay, people get very opinionated of what color scheme you should use. I'm really a big fan of their default dark themes that come with VS Code. There's so many other people that get crazy about all these different themes out there. I honestly really like the default dark theme from VS Code. But again, this is very much a personal opinion. But something you should absolutely do is in VS Code, as soon as you get in there, Command-Shift-P, and I'll show you right now in VS Code what that looks like. So we're in VS Code, pretty much anywhere I am, Command-Shift-P, and it drops open these list of commands that I could just type and search. So if I say install command, right here I get shell command, install code in command path, and I want to execute that. And what that's going to allow me to do is right here in this folder where I have a project, I can type code space period, and it will actually open this project now in VS Code for me. So here we have the Boca Code website project right there. So very useful. Install that command path, and then there's extensions as well. So everybody gets also gets opinionated over what extensions, and these you could see all kinds of extensions. And ones that I'm really a big fan of, Git Lens. Git Lens is amazing because you can go on any line and you could see who was the last person to change it and when, right? So I can look and see, Mariella changed this line 6 days ago. I changed this line 1 day ago. Very, very useful. And there's a ton of these that are depending on what you're doing, if you're in React or Vue, if you're in Python or PHP or C# or whatever you're using, there's all different extensions that you might want to use. Ones that I really recommend for everyone: Git Lens, highlight matching tags. So when you have in an HTML tag, you open a tag and you close a tag. If there's a lot of code between, you could click and it'll highlight the open and the close tag. Auto close tags, so when you start a div, it'll automatically create the closing tag for you. Auto rename tags, so let's say you want to turn a paragraph into a div, you highlight the P, you type div, it'll also change the closing one. And Visual Studio IntelliCode, where you can type a few short things and it'll help auto complete and really build out code for you. There's a ton more, and I'm sure people will leave comments on this video of some of their favorite extensions. But I definitely encourage you to shop around, look at some of the different extensions, play with some of the different color themes, and make Visual Studio Code feel just right for you. Another one that's actually really good is there's one that allows you to actually like tag team, where you can actually be coding at the same time as somebody else in your VS Code. So they open VS Code, You invite them to your project, and they can basically see your screen. You get two cursors, theirs and yours, and it's very useful to helping each other out. So that gets you the basics, right? Everything we just went through. Now your machine is set up and ready as a generic development machine. And then the rest from here on really depends on what language you're going to be working in. If you're just going to be working in, on iPhone apps, for example, iPhone and iPad, iOS apps, just fire up Xcode, you're ready to go. But if you're going to be using, let's say, JavaScript, you're going to want to install Node.js and likely install Yarn as well. So brew install Node, brew install Yarn. Node, you probably want to install no matter what. A lot of different software use it. Even if it doesn't use JavaScript, it'll use Node Package Manager, which comes with Node. So you definitely very highly likely that you're going to want to install Node. Yarn is also really good. You might as well install the bunch. Then Damien says, good timing. He's setting up his box today. So glad we can get this for you, Damien. Damien probably is going to want to install a lot of these languages because he's a senior developer that codes in just about anything. So one thing that's great about the Mac is it actually comes with so much pre-installed. And that's why a lot of developers love developing for the Mac, unless you're developing in like .NET, which is an area that my buddy Damien, who's watching, happens to be an expert in. One thing though is the Mac comes pre-installed with Python 2. And a lot of developers now prefer Python 3. So if you're a Python developer, very often you're going to want to install Python 3 as well as pip. So single line, boom, this one line, now you're up and running with Python. Java, if you're, particularly if you're doing Android development or some back-end development, actually Java currently is the leader as the #1 most popular language in the world, although I believe that JavaScript is pretty hot on its tail. So 2 lines here. What this first line does is it says, hey, we're gonna go and we're gonna grab some different casks here, and then we're gonna install Java. So it's just 2 lines, and now you're ready to develop in Java. Scala, single line. You install Scala and SBT, you're good to go. If you want Ruby, this is just a single line. The slash here lets you put a command onto a second line, but it executes this as a single line. So you're going to install Ruby. You're going to install a few of the dependencies. Ruby uses packages called gems, so a lot of this is just managing those. Go, you can literally say brew install go or go lang, and you're good to go. And Rust, brew install Rust up, you're good to go with Rust. So even some of from the older languages to some of the latest and greatest, with brew installed, you can often install things with a single line. And as I mentioned, that a lot of software uses the Node Package Manager npm to install them. If you want to install things like Google command line tools or Firebase command line tools, oftentimes single command like npm install. This -g says install it globally, not just installing it in the project we're in right now if you're in a folder, but install this for the whole machine. So you want to make sure you're using that -g. And then Firebase tools. So it's saying, npm install globally Firebase tools. Once that's installed, Firebase login. It'll pop open your browser. You log into your Firebase account or your Google account. It'll drop you back to the command line, and it'll be all set. So super easy. Really, the Mac is such a nice place to develop some of these things. I don't mean to bash Windows, and Damien, I know, does a lot of Windows development stuff he couldn't probably do on a Mac in a lot of ways. I think I have own 7 computers, and one of them now is a Windows machine. So, it has its place. But I'm definitely a Mac fanboy. So, especially for development. That's all I have for you guys today. I wanted to keep this quick and short and show you just how easy it is to set your Mac up for development. Come check us out, bocacode.com. Join our Slack group, get involved in some of the discussions we're having, and also I highly encourage you to visit our sponsor, palmbeachtech.org. If you want to join their Slack channel, palmbeachtech.org/Slack. And two very great Slack communities you can get involved in, and with job postings, posting your resume, all kinds of great things. We really, both of these communities are there to to serve and help and work with developers and trained developers. So thanks for getting involved, and hope you found this informative. Leave me some comments. Don't forget to subscribe.